Hello and welcome to the Productive Habits Podcast, where we talk about our journey of going from non-productive wastemen to aspiring productivity gurus. As always, we're your co-hosts Dennis and Jamie, and in this episode, we talk about stress, how to deal with burnout, feeling overwhelmed, and stress management. So stressful times in our lives and the techniques we use now to help manage our stress. But before that, how are you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing just great. Thank you for the awesome intro. I am feeling not stressed at all. And well, that's awesome for me. But I have had a pretty busy week. It is the second week back to school, college. And, it's pretty packed, really, really packed, actually. But that's other than work. I am, focusing on this podcast. Not much has happened in the past 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So that's really it on my end. Just work, everyone's back to school and gotta mark those papers now.
Oh yeah, papers for
How about
days, man.
yourself, man?
Yeah,
Papers
dude.
for days.
Dude, I'm happy that you're not stressed. I'm feeling the burn a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah,
because
it's
you're
start.
back in school.
Yeah, I'm back in school. It's about week 3 for us engineers now, and
Mm.
yeah, man, the stress is like starting to kick up. I'm starting to feel the fire under my feet a little bit, so it's kind of like pushing me to work a little bit better, a little bit harder.
That's good. Yeah, we're on opposite ends here, right? You're the one getting the assignment. So you're getting assignments now, right?
Yeah, I'm
Like
getting
you've
assignments
started
now. Yeah,
them. That's crazy. That's so crazy. So how
yeah,
are you dealing
honestly.
with it? How's the first month?
The first month has been okay. The first 2 weeks were pretty light, but then this third week, things are
Mm.
starting to come full force. Everything's kind of happening at once. So yeah, man, like it's starting to ramp up. And I feel like because it's happening this week, it's kind of a good segue into our topic because this week, if you're from Canada, if you're from Toronto, you know what Bell Let's Talk is.
Yeah, it's a big thing. Mental health is such a big topic. And Bill, I love it when corporations can get behind some social matter that is very important in today's time,
Mhm.
and that is mental health. I'm not too sure on the statistics, but I think on average, at least everyone on a yearly basis faces some sort of mental health issue. It doesn't have to be crazy big, but something
Mhm.
that affects you. I'm not too sure on the statistics once again, but I'm so happy that Bell and hopefully other companies can get behind it because it is a big topic. And the university that I graduated from, Brock, I
Mhm.
think it came first in rankings in terms of providing students resources for mental health
Oh, that's
because
fantastic.
you're right, it's something that needs to be focused more. And it makes sense, right? Your mind is everything, it controls everything, and if something like anxiety takes over, then you're not going to be a good student, or you're not going to be doing the things you want to do. So I'm not too sure on the logistics. What exactly is Bell Let's Talk doing?
Yeah, so I was just gonna kind of backtrack a bit and kind of bring it up. So Bell Let's Talk, basically they have this initiative every year
Mm.
where they promote awareness to mental health issues by using the hashtag Bell Let's Talk. And every time you use the
Ah.
hashtag or kind of retweet or like watch a video, they donate 5 cents towards mental health initiatives. And I think this video, it was a very funny video. Well, not funny, but it was like a video of Michael Bublé just kind of doing normal activities. And every time you watch the video, they
Mhm.
would donate 5 cents as well.
Oh, that's so cool. We should do something the same, but instead of 5 cents, let's do half a penny.
Oh. Okay, yeah. We'll work on something for the yearly review. We'll do something that can definitely help out once we have a little bit more capital, you know?
Yeah, a little more capital would be nice. Wink.
Wink, wink,
Wink,
definitely.
wink. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's something
so
we're all in for, right?
yeah, exactly. But just to kind of like go back to Bell Let's Talk, they basically deal with like, what it feels like to, deal with stress, deal with pressure, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, dealing with burnout, which coincidentally is kind of what you deal with on the other side of the spectrum of productivity when you go too far, right? So when you go too far, when you push yourself too hard, you're prone to begin feeling stressed out. You're feeling anxious, you're feeling burned out, you're feeling overwhelmed. And that's why we're kind of talking about it today because we're bastions for productivity, but at the same time, there is a limit to it. There is such thing as going too far. And we never want anyone to go too far. We've gone too far, and we're going to kind of talk about our experiences in that and basically, what it means to have a nice balance between doing what it is that you want without pushing yourself to an extent that you can't handle.
Yeah, and as Dennis mentioned, we have been talking about the good things with productivity, how it could, you know, make you reach your goals and make you find more time. But, you know, greed is a human nature. And so
Mhm.
when we do these things, when we accomplish a productive task or we become more productive, our natural inclination is to push ourselves even more, right? And it essentially becomes a positive feedback loop where you're looking for more ways to be productive. And yeah, as Dennis mentioned, that can lead to, you know, burnout, anxiety, and those are very real topics. And I'm really happy that we're talking about it, because I too, and I'm assuming Dennis has gone through some moments in our lives. It's usually university, to be honest, when we're
Definitely
still
usually
growing,
university,
we're still
yeah.
dealing with things. And so I'm so happy that we're talking about it, because I do have my fair share of things I want to mention on this podcast.
Yeah, but even like more than that, like even at the workplace, I'm sure you
Oh
felt
yeah,
overwhelmed, or you listeners have felt like you've been asked to do too much and you feel like you have to. Feeling burned out or overwhelmed can happen at any point in life. And the
yeah,
reason, we kind of think it's a really big deal is because we find it important to find techniques to properly manage these feelings and expectations that other people have so that you can kind of take control of yourself and really be within the guidelines that you set yourself in.
yeah. Honestly, it's, you know, as long you could do everything, right? You could
Hmm.
overload your work schedule, but as long as you have, you know, these techniques, you have these tricks that you have up your sleeve to help manage and prioritize your task, it's totally doable, in my opinion. But I think it starts with putting yourself in a good position via having those techniques, maybe exercise or whatever else it is, and really just, it's, I think it's a mindset thing as well, how you view yourself in regards to the task at hand or your schedule at hand. So very
Yeah.
important in the workplace too, right? Because we got meetings, we got project deadlines, and
Hmm.
we can feel overwhelmed when those deadlines are coming to a near point.
Yeah, 1,000%. So I'm just gonna kind of just break down, one of the few aspects of like burning out and feeling overwhelmed, right?
Mhm.
So we talked about already. It's stress. It's that
Yeah,
buildup within you that kind of like, and stress, right? There's good stress and then there's bad stress.
there's,
Stress in
yeah.
controlled amounts is good for you because it pushes you. It's like working out, it's exercising, right? When you lift, you put stress on your body, but then afterwards you rest. And then you're able to recover and your muscles can, reattach after like what is it? They
Mhm.
break, right? Essentially.
Yeah, yeah. They break down and they recover via, I don't know what else. I don't know the actual science term behind it,
But yeah, exactly.
but it's
Like,
good.
yeah, it's a good type of stress, right? And then you have a bad type of stress. The bad type of stress is the one that kind of, it eats at you, it makes you gain weight. It's that cortisol over time because stress is, it's part of the fight or flight reflex. Initially, it's good, but when there's too much of it, it can promote really bad, instant. It can promote really bad behaviors on your body, and over a prolonged time frame, it can really start to show negative effects. So that stress, there's also pressure, right? Pressure
Yeah.
from yourself, pressure from your colleagues, pressure from your family. All of that can begin to add up and kind of exacerbate this feeling of burnout.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to the good and, or I guess more on the bad stress. Like the bad stress is where your body, what was it? Your body produces cortisol, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
would say
right.
that's I would say that's good to some degree, but I think you mentioned it where in the long run, if your body continuously produces cortisol in response to these stressors,
Yeah.
then that can lead to long-term effects. And I think what happens is, I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure what cortisol does is it takes or stores energy away from non-important bodily functions,
That's exactly right.
right? So that it could use that energy towards whatever the task is at hand. And so back then it was, you know, running away from a tiger or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So if this keeps on happening, right,
Hmm.
your body keeps on taking away energy from these non-bodily functions such as reproduction, skin healing, whatever that's not important, then as Dennis mentioned, can lead to huge devastating effects such as immune system, right? Your immune system can be out of whack,
Exactly.
diabetes, you gain weight, reproduction function is
Hmm.
actually lowered. So it's actually really bad chronic stress. And, we are going to talk about ways to essentially mitigate that and control it.
Yeah,
I think one
absolutely.
other thing, yeah, and you also mentioned pressure too, right?
Hmm.
And overwhelmed is a big one, feeling
Yeah.
overwhelmed. Oh man, so many times in my life where I just feel overwhelmed,
Yeah,
right?
right. And it's typically because we kind of ask ourselves to do more than we're capable, or we ask ourselves to do more than we should at a given time.
Yeah. And I think it's when you don't really, and I'm kind of backtracking, but when you don't really have a clear defined goal, then
Hmm.
it's much easier for you to take on these other tasks that are
Oh
not
my God,
important,
yes, a
right?
thousand
It's like,
percent. Yeah.
um, and we'll talk about it in the next, I guess, in a bit. But when I was in masters, to give you a short story, when I was in my masters, I was trying to juggle between too many things, and it was not in line with my goal, and so that was one reason why I was feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Right. And, we'll definitely get to that in a bit. But another thing I kind of want to bring up, and this has kind of been exacerbated in our very connected social media age, and that's comparing yourself to others, right? So looking at
Oh,
someone else's Instagram, someone else's Twitter, someone else's
hmm.
LinkedIn, and being like, wow, they're so accomplished, right? Why don't I feel like that? Why don't I have that same set of accomplishment that they do? And that whole kind of toxic mentality, right? Of basically looking over at someone else's fence and seeing that it's greener. Well, you know what the saying is, the grass is always greener on the other side, right?
Hmm.
So it's not a healthy mindset to have. And I think now, especially with the advent of how connected we are digitally, it's becoming more and more of a problem. Kind of just really adds to this feeling of feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, feeling anxious, and all of that stuff.
I think it's not really one thing that can make you feel stressed. It's a bunch of things, right?
Mm,
Feeling overwhelmed, feeling pressured, and comparing yourself is huge. And on, like, realistically, on Instagram and any social media, they're showing you the best, right? They're not showing you the
yes.
nitty gritty. So it's all a show, and it's toxic. It is toxic, but you got to just stay in your lane, right? When you drive, you're not
Yeah.
really paying too much attention to what the other person is doing. Yeah, you might have them in your peripheral, but you're more concentrated on what's ahead of you. And so I think that helps me a lot, is just stay in your lane and don't worry about what other people are doing. And one thing, because I used to do it a lot actually, comparing myself, is I stopped watching what people do. In other words, I stopped going on their Instagram page. I stopped viewing their stories. I stopped checking out their LinkedIn profiles as often. And I think that's a terrible thing. Checking other people's LinkedIn profiles. This guy has this certification. Oh no, I don't have that. He worked or she worked here and I want to work there. It's so
Mm.
toxic, right? So just focus on yourself. And that really helped me so
Yeah,
far. So far.
1,000%. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a sneak peek into the things that we do ourselves. But before we could learn like the techniques to kind of mitigate all this stuff, we first have to go through it. And
Mhm.
being on this journey of productivity, we've run into our fair share of burnout, feeling overwhelmed. Because when you're on a journey, you tend to make mistakes, and that was some of our mistakes, right? We tried to do too much. We tried to look at what other people were doing from a very toxic point of view, and try to apply things that we didn't need to do for ourselves. And so we're gonna kind of, we're gonna talk about our experience with that, just feeling burnt out, feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, and kind of like how we dealt with it afterward.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I mean, you're in a good position if you're listening, because we went through all of these
Mm,
mistakes and failures, and we're now coming from a position where, like, oh, in regards to that failure or mistake, here's what I did that worked. So hopefully you guys can learn from our mistakes and all that. One thing I do want to kind of backtrack, I forgot to mention when it comes to feeling overwhelmed, in my opinion, and this works for me, so not necessarily it may work for you, right? So mental health is such a vast topic. There's not one go-to solution.
for sure.
So what I noticed, in terms of feeling overwhelmed, is that I think I mentioned one thing was setting goals and you need to prioritize, but it's a mindset. And I'm eventually going to talk about how I use that mindset to overcome these difficulties during, my journey to becoming a productive, person.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned that in your master's program,
Yeah.
you were kind of dealing with these feelings yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, like the masters, like any masters, it doesn't even have to be like mathematics or engineering. It could be anything. It's always
Yeah.
going to be rigorous. There's always going to be deadlines. And honestly, like the transition from undergraduate to masters was a huge jump
Yeah. And sorry, just to
because
quickly interject,
undergraduate,
you have your master's in economics
yes,
for those who don't know.
yes, yeah. So yeah, I do have my master's in economics. I got my bachelor's in economics. And I think with the bachelor's program, it doesn't really prepare you for the masters. I think it's built around the fact that you are going to, get the degree and then go to the workforce.
Right.
Yeah, and so when I made that jump, it was a huge like eye awakening to all these things I was not expecting, such as deadlines, the intensity of the material I was not used to.
Mhm.
And I was put in a position where I'm like, crap, I feel like overwhelmed. I feel, stressed, right?
Right.
And low key feeling a bit anxious or experience anxiety
Yeah, for
because of
sure.
the pressures that people have on you, and it sucks. So like you're going to have a supervisor, you're going to have people that are going to keep a track on your progress in a sense.
Hmm.
And if you're not up to that standard, right, it really affects how you think. It really affects how you go about your life because now you're thinking of what they're thinking of you,
Right.
and that's totally not a good thing to do. So my master's was kind of a fun thing, I guess you could say, a fun experience with a lot of uh, tribulations and failures.
Yeah, dude, I can only imagine like how the pressure you must have felt because you have a PI watching over you directly, right?
Yeah,
So that means
and yeah.
no, go on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like I don't come from a very uh, mathematical background. I'm not very good at it. So going into masters in economics was like, yo, look at all this math. Like, what's a I think it was my first time learning an integration.
Right.
And you learned that first, I think first, second year in engineering, right?
Unfortunately, first year. Yes.
Unfortunately, I think it
Yeah.
was my first time learning integration, and we go straight into like triple integrations. Like, what? It's a triple integration. What does that even mean?
Right. Right. Right.
And so it was a huge shock. And I had to really like just prioritize and force myself to adapt.
Hmm.
So one shortcoming of myself is that it's very hard for me to understand things at that level. So
Right.
what I did, which I don't recommend, is memorize. I guess this is a little side thing, but memorize it if you can't understand it. So that's what I did. And Dennis was there during my times where he would see me surround myself with like whiteboards of like math
Yeah.
equations.
Yeah. So this is actually in the Ryerson SLC or Student Learning Center, and basically
Yeah.
we kind of pick a floor. I think it was the sixth floor, right?
Hmm.
And we pick the sixth floor. We take as many whiteboards, like movable whiteboards as we could. Basically surround Jamie in a cage, and he just used like all four of them to memorize these equations.
Yeah, it was intense. And it's just like math, like not a single word to be found. Like you might have letters because letters represent variables.
Hmm.
And even that's like a hard concept for some people to grasp,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, what variable? What do you mean? This X can be anything? What? That doesn't make sense. So I was kind of like that. Now have a million of those variables surrounded me. So
Yeah,
I
that's
just had
insane,
to
man.
memorize.
That's insane.
I had to adapt. So like when it comes to dealing with all those pressures, what helped me was just sit down and just focus on one task. So when it came to that course, I had to just sit down and focus on these equations, focus on memorizing. And yes, of course, the pressures of, your supervisor are there, but the more tuned in I was able to eventually pass the course. I actually failed it the first time. It was the second time that I had to adapt by memorizing, and then
Oh,
I
I
passed
see.
it. Yeah, it was crazy. I got like a 46 in that course,
Oh, wow.
and then yeah, and then I got a 71.
Let's
It's funny
go.
because in your master's program you need like a 70 to pass the course. So I
Yeah.
barely passed
Yeah, I
it.
was gonna say like threshold for failure is really high, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like normally it'd be like a 50, but then you actually like, need like what, a B minus or something like that.
yeah. But isn't
And
that like with some of your engineering courses? You need like a 60 or 70?
no, so engineering is And it's funny because I didn't realize this until you told me like a while back that other
Hmm.
courses had different thresholds for passing. But
Yeah.
I think engineering and the sciences, it's you need a 50. That's it.
Oh,
I
I
think
think it's because it's so hard already.
maybe, but nursing, I believe you need a 60 or 65 to pass.
But I see nursing making like you can't be making mistakes in nursing. So
Yeah,
that, but same
yeah.
thing with sciences too.
Same thing with engineering. If you're building a bridge, hopefully you're not just barely passing. But I
I think
mean,
it's the nature of the engineering edge is so difficult already that
mm,
people it's like unrealistic to get a 60
yeah, but like
or
coming
like
from
yeah.
me hearing you say that you need a 70 to pass is frankly it blew my mind. It's like, wow,
Yeah,
that's insanely high.
and that's another pressure that I was feeling that I didn't take in just now is like, yo, I have to get a 70, right? And so
Yeah,
before, in some courses, your mindset was, oh, I just need a 50 and I'm good. Like that's your
yeah,
fallback.
yeah.
But here, my new fallback was, oh man, I have to get a 70.
Is that even
I
a
was getting
fallback?
70s before. No, it's not.
No,
It's
it's
not a
not even a
fallback.
fault. Like you actually had to do well.
I was like, yo, I'm so used to getting 70s in my undergraduate, but now I have to actually get a 70 to pass, right?
Yeah, dude, that's
So
ridiculous.
it was a big jump, and I like reflecting on my graduate career because there was one time where there was this one professor who like I did not want to just see
Mm,
because I was too in my head. I'm like, this professor thinks lowly of me. I'm not meeting expectations,
hmm.
and so I would purposely like, if I could hear him get out of his office and I'm in the same hallway as him,
Yeah.
I'll try to run away, like it's not run, but walk
Oh,
fast
you
in
go in
the
like
other
the opposite
direction,
direction, right?
or head into my friend's my friend's office and just kind of like chill because I hated that small talk. And in reality, he probably wasn't thinking anything of it. But whenever I am conversing with him, I'm thinking, yo, this professor thinks I'm, stupid, that I shouldn't be here. And I was really playing in my own head. And I think it became to a point where uh, anxiety is where like, what's anxiety again?
It's basically kind of you like freezing up. It's like that feeling of nervousness, like but magnified.
Yeah, it's like kind of like that nervousness. My heart rate picked up when I ever
Yeah,
sense like, oh, this professor is gonna leave, or I hear him walking, my heart rate to pick up, and I'm like,
yeah,
yo, I gotta get out of here, right?
yeah. It's like nervousness
So I,
precipitated on like bad feelings, right?
yeah, that's it, and it was all just like me playing mind games with myself, right? Like I
Mm,
was thinking, yo, he thinks lowly of me, but
right.
that's just me saying that. I don't know that for sure,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so I was dealing with that during my graduate career. And it's kind of comedic in hindsight.
Hmm.
So uh, honestly, with that, like I didn't really deal with it on the spot. I just kind of let it. I just graduated,
You pushed
right?
it to the side.
But it decided grad because eventually time heals everything,
Yeah.
and I understood that. So if I just took a day at a time, graduate, then eventually I'm just gonna be out of there. I'm not gonna deal with this professor. So that's how I think that's a good thing. It's just time heals things,
Mhm. And
and
also
it did in
it's
my
good.
case.
Yeah, and also it's good to like self-reflect, right? Because then you can kind of look
Yeah,
back and be like, okay, you know what? Maybe he wasn't actually thinking that I was like a bad student or something like that. Because most of the time, you're right. It's like I guarantee you, most of the time, these feelings of anxiety are feelings that don't actually exist for the other person. Like you thought that he was like, oh, Jamie's a bad student. I don't think he's worth
100%.
it. And
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
he was never thinking that to begin with.
right. I like that how you mentioned just take time to self reflect, and I did that right. Like after my graduate career, it's like he probably didn't really think of me like that,
Yeah.
right? And so when I move forward with just my life working, I don't feel that same sort of anxiety because
Mm.
in reality, they're probably not thinking like that,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so, and what I've noticed, going into the workplace is I can make better decisions. I'm not worried, right? I don't want to be worried when I'm about
Hmm.
to work or about to teach. And so it does help a lot when you kind of just shift that mindset by self reflecting.
Yeah. Because we can
So,
get into our own head
yeah,
sometimes. And sometimes it's good to like, internalize a bit and realize that, okay, this is not what's actually happening. Let me step out for a bit and kind of assess the situation.
I think there's this really cute quote that Evan, shout out to Evan, she posted on her page. She's like, if you're going to live in your head, at least make it a nice place. So if you're the type of person that, just thinks too much, I know it's easier said than done, but at least try to make it a nice place, like your bedroom or whatever. And so,
or your desk or something, right? Like
yeah,
make it nice.
like I spend most of my time on my desk. I try my best to make it clean. Makes me feel better.
Hmm.
So apply that same analogy to your mind. Make it a nice place.
I really like that. Shout out to Evan. That's a great
Shout
quote.
out. That was a
Really
really
enjoy
good
that.
quote, right?
Yeah, I really like that.
I wish I kind of like heard that during my graduate career because I was really living in my head and was not in a very good place
Yeah,
in the sense of anxiety and all that.
yeah, for sure.
So that was my little spiel. Fun times. It's actually fun looking back in those moments where you go through these pressures. No,
Hmm.
like that one time you took like 10,000 courses.
Yeah, so
Wasn't it fun? Like looking back in hindsight, isn't it fun?
yeah, everything in hindsight is fun.
Hindsight is fun.
Hindsight is fun, but when you're actually going through it, man, it's something else. And yeah, it's great you bring that up. I was actually going to talk about that because that's probably like the most recent example I can think of dealing with all of these things: stress, feeling overwhelmed, feeling pressure, all of that stuff. So yeah, just I talked about it before, but just to kind of like re-explain. So last year I took 9 courses.
Yeah.
Um, Normally you can take 5, max you can take is 7. I took 9 just because I wanted to. I wanted to really kind of experiment with what I could do with myself. The semester before I performed really well, and I thought that what, if this is a sign of things going forward, then I should be able to do this, and still excel. So number one, horrible way to kind of frame it, because if you're already doing well, there's no need
Yeah.
to push yourself to an extreme to see if you can do well again. So
High
number
key,
one,
yeah.
yeah, number one, just a bad way to frame things to begin with. But that was kind of my mindset, to give you a little bit of context. So I was doing these 9 courses, and let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. So I was taking organic chemistry.
That's hard.
No, sorry, general chemistry 2, general chemistry lab,
Hard.
biomaterials, biomechanics,
Hard.
differential equations. I was
All
taking
hard.
French. I was taking intro to world music and psychology. That's
Say the
9.
second last one. Intro to road music.
World music.
Oh,
So like
like yo. Yeah.
music around the world. And then I was
Oh,
taking
okay,
psychology.
true.
So that's 9. 5 of those are really intensive, and then 4 of them require a lot of time still, right? Because like a lot of people will tell you university is easy depending on your program. No, all university degrees are hard. They all require work. They all require time. They all require effort.
Facts.
If you're in university, it's not easy. You still have to work to excel. That's just how it is. So like when people tell me, oh yeah, I'm in a certain kind of engineering, or I'm in a certain kind of arts program, to me it's all the same. It's all hard. It's all difficult work, because at the end of the day, you still have to put the time in to really excel.
Yeah.
So I took 9 courses, and as you can expect, that didn't leave me with a lot of free time, right? So
No free time, man. No free
yeah,
time.
no free time. So for about like 4 months, I I wasn't really talking to anybody. I wasn't really doing anything outside of my schooling. I had blocked myself on Instagram, on Twitter. I muted our many group chats, so I wasn't like receiving notifications, and I wasn't really talking to anyone else. And I wasn't doing anything else but school. And in the first month or so, it's kind of doable. In the second month, okay, like I see that it's starting to trend downward, but I'm already in this. I can't turn back, so I just have to keep going.
Yeah.
And that's what I kept telling myself. I just have to keep going. And 3 months in, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to go a bit manic here. But I just had to keep going. And I think it was that also, it's a very toxic mindset, right? When you can't stop, when you can't let yourself breathe, where you have to feel like you have to keep going. And I felt like I had to keep going, and I did. But by the end of it, I had been devoid of like social contact for like 4 months. I hadn't seen my friends in like 4 months. I'd missed out on like birthdays, special events, from like friends and family, just because I felt like if I wasn't studying, I wasn't being the best that I could. And if I wasn't being the best that I could, that I was going to fail.
Yeah.
So I had this immense pressure on myself that I don't know if it was like, well, it was definitely all in my head for sure, because no one else was putting that pressure on me but myself. And that's another thing that you talked about, right? Like these feelings that we feel, like anxiety or pressure or stress, most of the time I feel it's self-inflicted,
100%.
right? So I was really like propping myself in my head that if I wasn't doing school, I was wasting my time. And if I wasn't using my time effectively, that the future wasn't going to be as bright for me. So basically, for 4 months, I was kind of living like this. And then when I finished, I had to go from school straight into the MCAT. And then when I tried that, it just wasn't working.
Yeah, that's intense. Like going from 9 courses to straight, and MCAT is like, for those who don't know, MCAT's not a game. It's not a joke, right? Like you have to study a
No,
lot.
yeah, so the MCAT is normally a 7 hour exam that you kind of take,
Right.
and it's comprised of 7 courses, essentially. So it's comprised of 7 parts.
Hmm.
So it's biochemistry, organic chemistry, general chemistry, physical sciences, biology, psychology, sociology,
Hmm.
and critical thinking and reasoning. So there's about 7 components that go into it, right? So I essentially went from doing 9 courses to doing 7 and preparing for like a 7 hour exam.
I think I would even argue that doing the MCAT in that short of a time is a lot more pressure
Yeah,
because the exam was 7 hours. It was like, okay, you only had how many months?
yeah. Well,
Two
the thing
months.
is, so normally it was 7, but because
Okay.
of COVID, it was
Oh,
condensed to about 4.5, meaning that your margin for error is even lower. So if you miss a question,
yeah.
if you get a question wrong, that percentage is going to be higher because they had to reduce the amount of questions for the time allotted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, I went from 9 courses straight into doing my MCAT, and by like month one, I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like it really started to hit me, like, okay, things are this is not sustainable. And for the first time in my life, I really understood what burnout was.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's good that you kind of tested that red line, right?
Hmm.
You know where you stand and you know that, oh, this is the red line. I'm gonna stay within it because as you mentioned, it is unsustainable. How long was that whole endeavor? Like 6 months, 5 months of just intense
So,
studying and working?
so when I realized that I couldn't do the MCAT the way I wanted to, I took about
Yeah.
a 2 month hiatus, right?
Okay.
Took about a 2 month hiatus, and I think we talked about it in like a podcast before, where basically I did nothing, right? I did
Yeah.
nothing.
Fire.
I didn't study. I didn't prepare. And at first, when I was doing it, I was like, "Yo, I'm wasting my time." And I still had these really kind of toxic thoughts, right? Where I felt like I was wasting my time because I wasn't doing
Yeah.
anything. But then by the end of it, I realized that, you know what? I kind of needed this. I needed to just take a break. I needed to see my friends, my family. I needed to talk with other people. And I needed to kind of
Mm.
expand my horizons outside of just school. And that's why, like, a big component for me this year is really trying to find balance so I don't make the same mistake I did last year. Because I feel like balance for me is a really integral part of how I'll be able to perform best, right? If I focus everything
Yeah.
on one particular avenue, I feel like I'm missing out on so much. And because I'm a very extreme person, I tend to focus all my efforts on that one particular thing. And by the end of it, I just feel drained.
Yeah, I think I've heard a quote by someone on TV, and they were talking about successful people, like
Mm,
just in general, not like the super successful, like NBA stars and actors, but in general, super successful. And the person said that she found a common theme amongst all these successful people was that they were balanced in the sense of the stuff they knew and how they perceived life.
yeah,
So they weren't just good at one thing. They didn't just do one thing. They did lots of things,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so I'm like, yeah, you know what? That seems right. Like it doesn't like for NBA player, that's not the case because they're just good at NBA. But in general, when I look at successful people that I define successful, they're good in many things and they kind of spread themselves out, not too thin, but to something that is sustainable for them. And I like that how you kind of rebalanced yourself, and that's important. And that comes with self-reflection, no? You just
Yeah, yeah. So like, when you're in it, like what you're saying, like when you were in your master's program, and you kind of felt these feelings, you kind of push it to the side
Yeah.
because you weren't really ready to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
In the same sense that you were trying to graduate, so you were focused on graduating. I was focused on doing, these certain things, so I kind of
Yeah.
pushed it to the side. When really I should have kind of like reflected a bit more at the, during when it was
During,
happening,
yeah.
just so I can get a better handle on things. I really reflected afterwards, and then I was able to kind of ascertain, what happened, why it happened, the things that really kind of set me on the path that I was on. And I feel like if I had like taken the time to really just stop, take a breath, and reflect on what's going on, it probably would not have affected me in the way that it had, to the magnitude that it had.
I think there's a common theme in both of our stories here is that we self-reflect after the fact.
Yeah,
We don't self-reflect during, right? We don't
yeah,
take the time to, and that's the consequences of overwhelming yourself. Is you're less likely to just pause and reflect and just
exactly.
evaluate your situation because we're feeling overwhelmed. You mentioned that you had the sense of urgency where whatever free time you had, it was doing school,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So you couldn't just like, yo, what am I doing? Am I happy? You can't do that. So I think that's very important in all aspects of your life, especially if you're trying to be a productive guru, is just self-reflect at any moment of your time or your life.
Yeah. And what we're asking for is not a lot of time. Like it's 5 to 10 minutes out of your day to really think about what
Really?
you're
Yeah.
doing that day, that week, that month. Just take time
Hmm.
to be present, to self reflect, and to breathe. Because I think that's really
That's
important.
important. Yeah.
You just breathe, right? Take time to pause because you need to understand that there's more to life than what you're doing right now. And if you don't really, focus on that, if you don't really internalize that, you're going to realize that 3 months down the line, you're going to feel like shit. You're going to feel burnt out. You're going to feel stressed. You're going to feel anxious. And you're going to feel all of these feelings that you really don't necessarily need to feel, provided you take the time to really self reflect.
And I think you're going to end up not necessarily wasting, but putting in more time in the future, trying to bring back those essentially areas of life that you left behind, right? So whether that be your friends, whether that be your personal goals, because you were so invested, it's going to take you more time to, bring that back up to a balanced level.
Yeah, no,
And I
you're
think
not as
that,
productive.
right?
You're not as productive, right? Like that's,
There you go. We're trying
yeah,
to be productive, right?
exactly. So it actually behooves you to take time to reflect if you want to be more productive.
Hmm. That's key. Huge, huge, huge tip. Self-reflect. And honestly, I think I should do them often. I think on a daily basis, right? Would be
Yeah, same here.
too
We
much.
actually, yeah, our previous guest, Ryan McGuadden, has really hammered home the importance of how meditation has kind of changed the way that he thinks about his life and perspectives. He does about 10 to 15 minutes daily of
Yeah.
meditation, self-reflection, just kind of breathing exercises to really slow things down and really, really
Mhm.
pause. So I think that's something that, we definitely can kind of take from that as well.
Yeah, I honestly want to get into meditation because it's well researched and I've seen, we have like a sample size. We've seen Ryan do it and it's just like it works. It works.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like I think his whole thing there was it made him be more present and focused on like the present moment. And when you can do that, you're more likely to self-reflect and just evaluate. So I think that's something I want to implement going forward in terms of
Oh, thousand
managing my
percent,
pressures and all these things I want to do.
1000%.
Because
So
my mindset still is, free time needs to be used towards productive means,
I
right?
know, yeah, I'm still in the same boat.
I'm still in that mindset. I'm trying to break
And,
that.
and it's a process, right? Like we're still working on it. But the thing is, we understand and we acknowledge.
Mhm.
And that's the first step,
And
right?
that is the first step. And, what can we do to essentially combat that? Like, what are
Yeah.
the techniques and things to work on to essentially combat that mindset?
And, great segue because what are trials and tribulations if not lessons learned, right? So what did we learn from all this? What managing tips did you kind of figure out for yourself after going through all this?
Well, what helped me, especially during my graduate career, to kind of essentially make myself deal with it a lot better on a day-to-day basis
Hmm.
was just exercise. For me, it helped me a lot because it took my time away from school and whatever else was on my mind. And I was able to reinvest that good energy that I got from working out and start, because I usually work down in the morning. I usually start my day on a good note, and that helped me a lot. Exercise. Also, it was its own form of meditation, right? Like just 2 hours, you are locked in into this environment where school assignments don't matter. And I found it very meditative. So exercise helped me on a daily mindset in the short run. But I think what helped me in the long run was reprioritizing tasks. So I failed to mention this, but during the first few months of my master's or graduate degree, I was working full time at Chase. And so I would essentially commute from Toronto. I can't hear you.
So you were working full time as well?
Yeah, so from August to September and first week of October, I was working Chase. So I used to work at Chase in a call center,
Mm.
and I was in Scarborough. And so I had to commute from Toronto to essentially St. Catharines on a daily basis.
Oh man.
Yeah, so it was pretty fun times. And I really wanted to stay in that company because my dream actually at the time was working at, JP Morgan on Wall Street. And so I found it as a great segue, right?
Right.
To as soon as I graduate, I'm assuming I'm still working, I'd, move around in the company and relocate to Wall Street. That was my goal back then.
Hmm.
And, naturally, just kind of commuting back and forth. And, there were some shifts where I would have work from, what was it, 4, 5 to 1, essentially.
In the morning.
And so, yeah, 1 in the morning. I remember I would have to catch the last train back home. And then it was crazy because I would have to wake up at 5. So I got home around 1:45, ate dinner, went to bed at 2. I would wake up and around 5:20 and catch the first bus to St. Catharines
Oh
at
man.
6:30.
So 3 hours of sleep.
And yeah, I did that twice a week. It wasn't every single day. And then there were some times where I had work that same day, so I had to take a bus back from St. Catharines to Toronto and repeat it. So naturally, that is very overwhelming and stressful.
Yeah.
And so first week of October, I just had to prioritize, right? And I think that helped me in the long run. I still do this to this day, is I prioritize what's important now.
Right.
What was important back then wasn't my dream career as I'll forget, investment
Morgan
banker
Chase,
on
yeah.
Wall Street. Yeah, what was important was graduating and getting that master's in hopes that it could help me get that job.
Right.
So I had to reprioritize. And I hated doing this, but I had to quit Chase.
Hmm.
And that was my only really gateway to Wall Street. But that wasn't that wasn't important now.
Right.
And so that really helped me. And I think when you're feeling overwhelmed is just, don't be afraid to just cut things that are not important. And so for me, working at Chase was not important at that time. And so that can be anything really. It could be, friendships that are not great, relationships, whatever it is that's not important, cut it. And then you'll find yourself obviously less overwhelmed and less stressed. So that really helped me is just reprioritize, right?
Right. But to add to that too,
So
I want to say friendships that are having a not beneficial effect on your life.
yeah,
So things that aren't beneficial. So we're not talking about getting out your best friend. We're not talking about cutting out your family. Things that you realize are having negative effects towards your life. That could be anything like social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, friends that are taking energy from you, being negative towards you, making you feel bad, stuff like that. So anything that isn't directly benefiting you or adding to your life, adding something of value to your life, repurpose and redirect that energy to something that is.
Yeah, and it also applies to work too, right? If you have a main project and one of your coworker is asking, "Hey man, can you help me with this task?" Don't be afraid to say no, right? If you think that's going to overwhelm you. And that helped me just saying no, cutting off connections, cutting off things that were not important really helped me just focus and not feel overwhelmed going forward during my graduate career. So that, sometimes in life you have to make those cuts. You have to make those essentially decisions, those hard decisions.
Right.
But you got to do it, right? You got to do it. So
Yeah,
that's what helped me a
definitely.
lot.
And part of it is
For
just
sure.
identifying those things that you need to kind of remove, right?
Hmm.
Identifying what it is that uh, is putting you in these negative aspects of your life, and then, taking action, actually making that executive decision.
Because the natural instinct for someone who's productive is, oh, if they have a busy schedule, is to do everything, right?
Yeah,
Do everything. But are you really being productive? I would say you'd be more productive if you were just to delegate or just cut things off. So that's where I stand is, and I still apply it to this day. Like, you know, if I'm ever overwhelmed, I'm not afraid to say no. I'm gonna cut that off. I'll If I have to quit a job, I have to quit a job, right? And I think that paid off a lot because I was able to get back on studies and I was able to eventually get my master's, which I'm pretty happy about.
yeah. And at the end of the day, getting a master's is better than working at a Chase call center.
100%, right?
Yeah.
Like, and a master's is not cheap. Like, it's not cheap at all. So definitely, I think in hindsight, I made the right decision.
I
In
think so
hindsight.
too. Definitely.
So yeah, those are my two. I really like exercise as a great way of just managing your stress.
And so at that time,
And
you were pretty much into ollie lifting, right?
yeah, I was pretty into ollie lifting and I like it. It was a fun hobby for me. And so when it comes to exercise, you have to find something you enjoy doing, right? And
Right.
for me, it was ollie lifting. So, when I was, it was a great gateway just for me to have fun in a sense, have fun in almost like a productive way. So, if you're in the same boat, like you hate exercise, or if you trying to exercise, try to find something fun. And whether that be group classes, obviously you can't do that now,
Yeah.
but there's online classes you can take. Walking actually, I would recommend as a great exercise.
Walking
It's
is
not
super underrated.
very, dude, right?
Walking is
Like
super
walking with,
underrated. Yeah.
it could be even very therapeutic if you have someone to talk to.
Or yeah, like I know it's kind of hard now, but like even just walking around your neighborhood, getting some fresh air, listening to a podcast to some music, calling someone on the phone while you're walking, super awesome, super beneficial, and it feels great. I feel like we really undervalue how
Yeah.
how important walking is.
I think from our perspective too is that, oh, walking is slow, right? We're going to take too much time,
Yeah.
right? It's like so counterintuitive to our kind of mindset, but
Mhm.
in reality, yeah, you're right. It's so underrated. It doesn't hurt your joints, which is the big one, in my opinion,
Yeah. And if you
compared
do
to
it for
running.
enough time, like you're still gonna, if your goal is to like burn calories, it can still be a calorie burner provided you do it for, a long enough distance.
And if you're listening to a podcast too, you're killing killing two
Two
birds with
stones
one
with no,
stone,
no, two
right?
stones with one bird.
Two stones with one bird. That's my. I had to think and sit back. I'm like, yo, am I going to say that again? But you know what? Put on a podcast, talk to a friend. I think those help a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I used to do jogs with a good friend of mine. His name is David, and we would go at a very slow pace so we could talk. And by the end of it, it was very therapeutic because we talked about whatever issues we had.
Hmm.
And when you voice out your issues, it feels great. It feels empowering, right?
1,000%.
Right.
And that's
And then
another
you get,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're getting the exercise too. So it's just like a double whammy. Again, two stones with one bird, right?
Yeah. Or in this case, four stones with one
Four,
bird.
four sterns. Because I made that one mistake earlier for one stern. So four
But yeah,
stern.
you
But
said
yeah.
something earlier that's just it just clicked for me just now, and that's actually about talking, right? Like vocalizing what it is you're dealing with. And last year, I didn't vocalize any of that. I felt like
Because
if I
yeah.
pushed it deep inside me, away, like in the corner where I wouldn't have to see it, that I wouldn't have to deal with it. And
Hmm.
and you can only do that for so long before it kind of comes back. And so, if you're going through something, talk about it. Talk about it with someone. Talk about it like, or just say it out loud if you don't have that. Like, vocalize it, because when you vocalize it, you get to hear it and you get to understand what those problems you're having are.
I think one of the biggest issues is when you vocalize and expose yourself like that. It's just an ego kind of thing. You don't want to appear weak to your
Yeah.
friends, but like, it's not really like that, right? If you are friends, then you're not going to think lowly of your friend like that, right? You're not
Yeah.
going to be like, oh, this guy is weak, man. This guy is voicing his opinions and his concerns. No one's like that
And
if you're
again,
actually
we
with your
just
friend.
talked about it, right? All these things, they're in our head.
Ah,
Most of
right?
the time, they're not going to think that way. It's like you and the professor, like, he probably wasn't thinking that way. So if we voice our concerns with our friends and loved ones, you know what? They're probably not going to think the way that we think they will. They're actually probably going to be concerned and help us out.
I think there's a quote that I was really good. It's from Stefan. He says it a lot. Stefan is a friend of mine. He's a comedian, and he says this a lot during his speeches and when
Mm-hmm.
he does stuff in his comedy shows. He says that the speed of vulnerability, wait, the speed of relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. So the more vulnerable you are, the faster the relationship can move, right? Whether it be friends, whether it be, actual personal relationships. So just be more vulnerable, and that will help nurture more stronger relationships.
And that makes sense because you can't form connections if you have a wall up. You just can't.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, connections require vulnerability, they require access and openness. And yeah, that's absolutely right.
So just be open and voice out your opinion. And I wish I did that in hindsight, because that would have helped a lot. Just it gives you a sense of empower, like just a sense of power over these emotions that you feel.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the lessons I learned last year is that I wish or not that I wish, but I should have
Hmm.
vocalized what I was dealing with more often with the people that I care about. So, talking to you guys, talking with my family, or just kind of speaking about what it is that I'm going through, the problems I'm having, that I'm stressed out, that I'm overwhelmed, that I feel pressure. Talking about it would have, helped kind of alleviate a lot of that.
Yeah, I really like that. One other strategy that I forgot to mention that I used to do, I don't do it as often or don't do it anymore, is just having a positive mindset via you doing affirmations, positive affirmations, and gratitudes. Is
Right.
that something do you do?
I don't do that, but I know a lot of people who do, and from what they tell me, it really adds a positive light to how they feel and their perspective. Because I do believe that there is something to how we perceive words, right? So if we're constantly hearing
Yeah.
something, I think unconsciously we start to internalize that. So if you're saying to yourself, I am worth it, I am productive, I'm amazing, I can do it, I think at some point your mind begins to subconsciously take that in and you start to believe it.
Yeah, I think like there's actual physical response when you say things like, "Oh, I am going to be a successful person," or
Yeah,
"I am a confident person," because yes, you're actually firing, I don't know, neurons, you're establishing those new neural connections, which are a physical thing. And so if
yeah,
you keep doing that enough, you're essentially rewiring your brain to, as you mentioned, believe it. And I think that's important. And it sets the tone for the day as well, right? If you say at the beginning of the day, I'm confident, I'm strong, then you're starting your morning on a very positive note. And I think that's important.
yeah, exactly. And we kind of break it down a lot, but the most important thing is how you view things. It's your mindset, right? Before you can do
Yeah.
anything, you have to make sure that your mindset is in the right frame so that you can look at things the way you want to. And if your mindset is in the way that you want it to be, you're going to be that much more productive in the things that you do. So if you think you're awesome, if you think you're amazing, you know what? You will be awesome and you will be amazing.
Yeah. And honestly, if you keep doing that every day, and that's what we're about, just consistency. So if you do that every day, you'll eventually become it. There's a saying, don't fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it. So even
Yeah,
if you're not this
exactly.
confident, right? Even if you're not this confident person, fake it. Eventually you'll fake it enough that you'll become confident.
Yeah, and it's one of those things I 100% believe that to be true. Like if I could
Mhm.
offer anyone any piece of advice spanning any type of problem, my suggestion would be like fake it till you make it, or
Yeah,
fake it to
I
be
think
you become
that's
it, I guess.
that's yeah, yeah. It's just like, sometimes we're not naturally this or that, but we truly know that's what we want to be.
Yeah,
So yeah, just fake it till you make it
and it
and
sounds
become it
bad.
at the end of the
It
day.
sounds bad to say fake it,
It does, right?
but in essence, what you're doing is trying. That's what you're doing.
Oh yeah. I think that's more important, to be honest, is
Yeah.
actually like the goal. I think we've kind of mentioned it. The goal is important, but what's more important is the journey to the goal.
Exactly.
And so when you adopt this mentality of faking it, and as you mentioned, at least you're trying.
Yeah.
And if you're trying, you're learning. And that's more important than the goal. I'd rather learn something than, get this, get that. Right. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly. The end is a
yeah,
byproduct of the journey.
right. Like, would you, let's say you want a dream body with six pack. Do you want to take a magic pill, or would you work
Actually,
hard for it?
actually, I know
That's a bad example.
I'm
That's a
pretty sure a
bad
million
example.
people would rather take the pill.
That's actually a bad example.
No, but I see what you're saying, right? Like
Yeah, right. It's like,
yeah, the journey is most of it, I feel, if not all of
yeah,
it.
it's not. That's right. Right. And, with that, when you work towards that six pack, you learn how to diet, you learn how to make your own food, you save money, right? And I think that's more important than the actual six pack.
Yeah, totally. And in line with fake it to make it and positive affirmation, it kind of leads into like visualizing it, right?
Oh,
Like if you and you talk about this a lot when athletes kind of they see things step by
mhm.
step, and by doing that over and over, they can reenact it when the time comes. It's kind of the same thing, right? In order to like kind of avoid these feelings of like nervousness, stress, and anxiousness,
Mm.
visualize yourself kind of dissipating those feelings, kind of like meditative, right? So I know Ryan kind of talks about this a lot in terms of like visualizing, doing the actual act, and then when you do it, you won't feel as nervous or anxious.
Yeah, and that's so I took this to give you a bit of background. I took this comedy course where at the end of 6 weeks you have to like essentially perform a stand-up comedy act in front of an audience.
That's crazy.
And so our teacher, right, is crazy. Like trying to be funny on stage is such a nightmare.
Yeah,
Like public speaking in general is nerve-wracking. Now
they act,
trying being funny.
public speaking, funnily enough, is constantly rated as the number one fear for most people.
Yo, because if you're the type of person, and a lot of people do this, like we think about what other people think of us. That's a
Yeah,
common thing people do, right?
yeah,
Now, if it's one person that you're worried about, imagine 80, 90 people watching you, right? So I could totally see why it's like a really big fear.
mhm,
And so I had to do that at the end of the 6 weeks is, stand up and perform and be funny. And our teacher, because we had a teacher, said, 2 weeks before, visualize it. 2 weeks before, practice your set, not only physically, 25 times in full, but visualize it
right.
an equivalent amount of time. Because when you practice it, you don't have that environment. You're not like in that environment of
Yeah,
a comedy set. But
mhm,
if you're visualized, you can put yourself in that environment.
yeah,
And so when you combine two things together, visualizing and practicing, you've done it a
yeah.
lot already. And it's so, as you mentioned, it helps with nervousness and all this anxiety. So it helps. Visualizing does help.
Yeah, and that can apply,
And
it can be applied to anything, right? So one of the things they say, especially important for test taking, like in school or for
mm,
the MCAT, for example, is
yeah,
visualize yourself in the situation that you're going to be taking the test in,
yeah,
right? So put yourself in a situation that mimics the environment of what you're going to be doing. So if you know it's going to be quiet, make sure you practice with no noise. If or like sounds of like pencil writing and stuff like
yeah.
that. If you know that it's going to be taking place at 8 a.m., visualize yourself and practice and prepare yourself to be able to take your test at 8 a.m., right? Don't practice at 9 p.m. because it's not conducive to what you're going to be doing.
That's actually A1 advice because that's what our teacher said, Stefan. He's like, when you practice, go on YouTube and blast bar noises. And
Yeah,
so when we practice, when I was practicing, I had bar noises just like on blast so that I get the feeling of, oh, people talking in the background, beer
yeah,
spilling and all that. And so I think there's this one NFL team. I'm not sure if it's NFL or college, but to simulate the live audience, they essentially go to the stadium to practice and
mm,
blast out live audience noises to the point where the QB or the linebackers or whoever can't
yeah,
hear the QB talking,
that's crazy.
right? So like simulate it as best as you can. And then when you get to that environment, your brain is already conditioned to handle it.
To kind of recap, we basically summarized it into about 5 different things, right? So exercise, um, it's a great way to take your mind off of things, right? To get some endorphins, to get some serotonin, and really boost yourself to kind of focus on something that really matters, and that's your body. It's your health.
Yeah. Um, just, you know what, if this is too overwhelming, what would you recommend if someone is like, trying to, deal with their stressors and feelings of anxiety and all that? What are two things you would just tell them that you recommend of
So
all the
two,
things we talked
yeah.
about?
So two things I would recommend: take a break, breathe, pause, step away from everything, and breathe. Right? Because once you breathe, you're able to really slow things down and take the time to evaluate what's going on. That's something I wish I did last year, and something that I'm still working on now. But the number one thing I would say is breathe. And then number
Yeah.
two thing I would say is vocalize it. Talk about it. Even if it's just to nobody, say it out loud so that you can hear it. Or preferably talk to someone, get it off your chest. Because when you share that vulnerability with someone, you know, it helps both of you. It helps form a connection, but it also allows you to really speak what it is you're going through.
I actually am going to agree with the first one. That is, detach yourself and evaluate. Just spend like a couple minutes a day just to self-reflect. I
Yeah.
think that's super important. I'm going to go on a slight different tangent, but they're almost the same in terms of effectiveness.
Hmm.
I would say exercise,
Yeah, for sure.
just from a personal, they're like almost equivalent in my opinion. So it
Well, I
doesn't
mean,
matter if you do one or the other.
yeah, any method works, right? As long as you find
Yeah.
something that works for you, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Try it out first. Try vocalizing. If that doesn't work, try exercise. If that works, then stick with exercising.
Yeah.
Or if it doesn't work, try something else, right?
Exactly.
But in my opinion, exercising really helped because it was almost a physical way of vocalizing, right? I get to release that stress and put
Right.
it to something else, lifting weights. And it was like my own period of time where I'm just focused on one thing, and
Right.
that's me. So, and there's a lot of physical and mental benefits, right? You get the endorphins, you get the feel good hormones,
Mhm.
your cardiovascular health, and all that. So I think exercising would be number two, in my opinion. Try it out, obviously, as Dennis mentioned, and see how it goes from there.
Or better yet, do all three, right? Do all
Right?
three.
Yeah, actually, do all
Take a
three.
break, vocalize it, and exercise. You can't go wrong.
Actually, yeah, do all three, right?
Yeah, do all three.
Why not? Like,
Yeah,
when you think about it, like when you self-reflect, 3 to 5 minutes. When you vocalize, I don't know how long you need. 20, 30 minutes, right? Talk to a friend.
yeah. Talk to a
Half an
friend,
hour.
whatever it is. Yeah,
Exercise, you don't need like an hour, 30 minutes.
yeah.
So
Go
the
for a
whole
walk.
thing.
Go for a
Right?
walk and do all of that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go for a
Go
walk
for a
and do
walk
all of
and
those things.
vocalize.
Yeah,
Bang, bang. You're good to go.
there you go.
All right. That's our productive advice for this podcast.
All right, Jamie. So now to get on to our favorite part of the podcast. What is your book recommendation of the week?
All right. So to be truth be told, I actually haven't prepared, but I do have something in mind. So if you would like to go first.
Okay, so the book that I have for you all this week is it's actually the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, very
Whoa.
prestigious literary award, and it's called The Emperor of All Maladies. And essentially, it's a biography of cancer, what it is, where it comes from, how it affects us, and basically all the things that we're doing to try and understand it. And it is a very thick read. I'm not gonna lie. It's about 500 or so pages, but by reading it, you're gonna get a very thorough and empathetic breakdown of what cancer is and how it does affect us.
Oh, okay.
And it's by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So check it out,
She's a
guys.
doctor.
Yes,
She's a doctor.
doctor as
Okay.
well.
So hold on. It's an autobiography or fiction, nonfiction? I forget.
It is a nonfiction book with real life cases
Beautiful.
of what it means to be affected by cancer.
And it has more of an empathetic and like an emotional attachment to it rather than a scientific aspect.
Yeah, it's a really good book in that it's kind of both, right? So it breaks down the science behind
Oh,
it,
nice.
but it also talks about it
Mhm.
from a human point of view. Like, what does it mean to us, and why should we really try and understand what it is?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Because I remember one book you recommended called Spark,
yeah.
and it was a great book, but it was very like science heavy, in my opinion.
It's very science heavy. So if you don't have a background in scientific terminology, it can be a
Mhm.
bit of a hard read. This one is a long read, but a bit of an easier one because it's more humanistic, right? You're going to learn some
Oh, I like
science
that.
behind it, but you're also going to see how it affects us on a very real level.
That's interesting. What's it called again? The Emperor of
The Emperor of All Maladies, a biography of cancer by Siddhartha Mukherjee.
Maladies. Isn't that like sickness? Like another word for sickness?
Exactly. And cancer is the king of them all.
Jeez. Oh, that's crazy.
Right?
See, I
There you
just got it.
go. There you
Just
go.
got it. Oh,
Yep.
what? I just got it.
Let's go.
That's a crazy. I like that. That's an effective title. So my book of the week, it's not. I wouldn't say it's a like a book. Well, it is a book technically, but it's more of
Mhm.
like a reference manual. It's called TED Talks,
Oh, okay,
the
cool.
official TED guide to public speaking. So if you ever, I'm assuming we've all watched at least one TED Talk, and they're really captivating when they're really good. So this book breaks down on the reasons why it's captivating.
Mhm.
So whether that be, the slides they use, how they vocalize things, the story. Usually what I noticed is when I'm watching a TED Talk and it's really good and I'm hooked,
Mhm.
there's a huge story component behind it.
Yeah.
And they break it down like, how do you create a good story? What are good PowerPoints? Like most people use PowerPoints as the main form of a presentation,
Mhm.
but it's it's just a supplement because at the end of the day, you are the star of the presentation. So if you have anything detracting away from you, then it's not going to be a good look and it won't be as engaging.
Oh,
So a lot
interesting.
of yeah, it gives you a lot of good tips, gives you examples of bad TED talkers. Usually the really bad ones are the ones that did not prepare. That's like the main issue.
Yeah, well, that's a given.
Yeah, right. So if you don't prepare, even if you have a crazy good presentation,
Mhm.
it's gonna throw you off.
Right, for
So
sure.
and this book was cheap. It's like $10
Oh, okay,
new.
that's great. Nice.
Yeah. So I'm all in for cheap books. So there's your cheap book. I'm assuming the Emperor Maladies is standard book price, 20
Yes,
bucks,
yes.
if that matters to
Standard
you.
standard book price. Let's see if I can find something here. It's gonna be about 20 bucks Canadian. But for the size of the book,
Yeah.
I'd say that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, dude, 500 pages, such a long read, but from the sounds of it, it's a more of like a Netflix in a book.
Yeah, it's a slow burn for sure. Like take your time, don't try and rush it all. Definitely a good
Hmm.
read. But also public speaking, right? You can never get enough of it. Anything that helps you kind of with that is a def recommendation in my book.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about how you mentioned public speaking is number one fear.
It's the number one fear. Yeah.
So I guess it's a kind of a good like connection there, right?
Yeah. Good
Cheap.
circle back.
Yeah. So I'm pretty happy with my pick.
All right, guys. This has been the Productive Habits Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.